Cincinnati. Tonight, we have a very exciting topic planned for you. It's our second Tuesday Talk of 2022. And we have a guest speaker tonight, Mr. Mark Batchelor, who will be talking about cybersecurity and reentry. We're always excited to bring these topics to you, your loved ones, and those we serve that are navigating their reentry journey. So thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I will introduce Mr. Daryl Graves.
Thanks, Kim. So good evening again on behalf of our Deputy Director, Ronnie Burks, and the Office of Reentry for the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. We welcome you. Thank you for joining us, as Kim mentioned, for this exciting and very timely session in the world that we live in, where we do so many things online using our phones and laptops and tablets and desktops and all those different kinds of devices that we spend so much time using and living on to do our work and our personal business. So our presenter tonight is going to talk to us a little bit about how to be more secure in using those things and some things to look out for as we navigate the virtual world that we spend so much time in, most of us every day. So just a couple things before we get to our feature presentation. One is I'll remind you the session is being recorded. I'll also remind you that we ask everyone to stay on mute. You'll be on mute throughout the session. If you have questions, use the chat function. You should see a little bubble there that indicates where the chat is on your device. Feel free to use that to put questions into the chat. As we proceed through the presentation, some questions may be answered by one of the team from the Office of Reentry who will be supporting the presentation. Otherwise, at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for a question and answer session, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions as much as we can. If we don't get to your question, we'll answer at a later time in writing from our presenter. We would ask you to be respectful of a couple of things. One is just be respectful of other folks who want to ask a question or who want to have some part in the discussion. And secondly, as we have done with all of our presentations in this Tuesday Talks format, we don't get into the details of any particular case or any particular thing with one individual. So if you have that kind of question, we'll have to address that at a later time, not during the session. So before we get to our presentation, the second thing that I want to ask you to do then is we just want to take a quick poll to ask you a couple of questions about how you ended up here tonight and why. And so if we can launch the poll now, we'll leave the poll up for about a minute to give you a chance to respond, and then we'll get back to you. Okay, it looks like we got responses to that. We appreciate you taking the time to respond to our poll. We try and use that information to help us focus on things that we can do differently and how we communicate with folks that we want to join our session. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Mark Batchelor. Mark is a cybersecurity expert who has agreed to talk with us a little bit about cybersecurity, how it works, some things to look out for, and in this particular session, how it relates to folks who are incarcerated or previously incarcerated, and the families and support folks who are attempting to assist those folks as they return to our community. So, Mark? All yours.
Thanks, Daryl, and Kim, thanks. So I'm glad we took that poll because now I get to see where we're coming from in terms of who I'm talking to, and that's going to be a big help because I'm really glad to be talking to a group like yours because we talk a lot about cyber safety and cybersecurity in my area, and this population never comes up in the conversation. I think that's a shame. Because the more resources you have, the better everything is, that you can help people be their best, but also because we're all impacted by cybercrime, like I'm going to show you. Whether it's me who works in this realm, I'm impacted by cybercrime, I have been impacted by cybercrime, or people who do not have support systems who are probably more vulnerable. I'm going to tell you all about what you can do to identify these things, what you can do to safeguard yourself, and some of the myths about cyber safety, especially as pertains to incarcerated individuals. So I'm going to share my screen now. Here. Whoops, gotta get this out of the way. Apologize. I have to stop the share a second. I apologize. That did not work as I thought. There we go. Sorry, Kim. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start by talking about cybercrime by defining cybercrime, because a lot of us, have heard of it, but we want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about cybercrime today. Basically, there are two ways we define it in the more common terms. First is if a device is the object of a crime, such as something like ransomware or viruses put on a computer, that's something attacking your device or computer. And the other one is if the device or the internet is used as a tool to commit a crime. Often it's things like credit card skimmers or robo-dialers that do denial of service attacks on services. And this is really important because it affects our everyday. We like to think of, or we used to like to think of cybercrime and technology as our personal computers, maybe our work computers, maybe our laptops, but now it's so much more than that. The strongest computer we all have is right here in our hands, as our phones. Our phones are capable of all kinds of calculations, but also secures all kinds of things that we want to keep private, whether it's a private email or a personal text that you don't want out there. It could be your bank account information, could be your health information, could even be your location. So these are things that we want to safeguard best we can. So we have to always think about things like the phone as a computer, and as such, it's vulnerable a little bit to cybercrime. And it's not the only thing nowadays. There are too many things in addition to computers and phones that leave us vulnerable to the outside. And those are called IoT devices, and that stands for Internet of Things. And basically that's any other object that's connected to the internet via Wi-Fi. So that could be your smart house, your thermostat, it could be your car, it could be your Fitbit watch, all kinds of things. And what it does is pretty much if you do not set a password on these things and a strong password, it's like leaving a door unlocked to your house. I'll give you two examples. The first is a couple of years ago, there was a little girl that was, her bedroom was invaded through the, I guess it's a Ring camera. And the perpetrator took control not only of the video, but of the audio. And so he could talk to this little girl in her bedroom, which is horrifying if you're a parent or anybody else. But it just goes to show that one small thing can get inside. And that all happened because when these things come out of the box, people don't put a password on it, or they keep the store-bought password. And what that does is makes it much, much easier to get inside and cause damage. Another less frightening example, but I think is entertaining and it illustrates the point, is a casino in London, I believe it was London, that had the high roller database hacked and robbed for millions and millions of dollars. And the way that the hackers got in wasn't through the online database for the casino, it was through the thermostat in the aquarium in the hotel lobby of the casino. Something that small is often forgotten about and not thought about needing a strong password because it's just a thermostat. But if somebody's determined, they can get in. So I'm not saying this is scary, but I'm saying this so that we can be aware of what we're doing and what we need to keep protected. Because God forbid somebody learns technology to hack into cars on a large scale. These things can be very dangerous. But let's talk about myths. I wanted to form this presentation as a myth versus fact for you to kind of break down some of the things that we think about often, but we don't really know a lot about. So the first myth is cybercrime does not impact incarcerated individuals. This is patently false because, like I said earlier on, it impacts everybody. And perhaps people who are incarcerated may be a little bit more vulnerable because they don't have some of the safeguards and systems that we might if we're working on a work computer with a whole IT department behind us. So one example, I picked 4 examples of scams that target these types of individuals and their loved ones, whether they're incarcerated or have transitioned back. These are things that we want to look out for, and we want to make sure that we're providing support systems for and throwing up red flags when we see them. First is an employment scam. As people are out there looking for work and looking to get meaningful employment, they're going to see a lot of things that are fishy and a lot of people trying to take advantage of that. So one thing they're going to do is they're going to ask you to pay a fee up front for the job or for supplies to work at home or to see more job listings. Anytime people want the money up front without showing you anything, without giving you anything, that's a sure sign of a red flag and should be avoided. Another is they make promises they can't keep. They're going to promise you making tons and tons of money right out of the gate, or they can hook you up with all kinds of jobs, but you don't know what those results are because the postings may be on job boards, but not on a company website. So you can see it maybe on Craigslist or Facebook job board. But when you go and you check that employer website, there's no mention at all of that job or anything like it, or not even a mention of maybe that HR person. Maybe they list their employees on there, and that person that you're talking to seems a little fishy. I threw a couple of these things down. I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but they're all circular, and you're going to get a copy of this, but they all circle around being wary of people who are down there in person and are asking for payments up front, because these are red flags. Anytime people are asking for you to sign something up front or to make a payment up front, you should best talk to somebody about it and avoid it or look somewhere else. Another, much like the employment scams, rental and real estate scams definitely target people who have been incarcerated as they're trying to find a place to live, move up, find a better place to live once they've been employed. And in the housing markets in Ohio, where I am in Florida, these scammers are out there looking for people who are looking for affordable living situations. Some of the things we might see are listings that contain typos and excessive punctuation. This is a sign that it's not a really serious business, and somebody's throwing excitement out there to get you to act on something. The sender insists on payment before seeing the property. So much like with the employment scams, they're asking for payment up front before showing you absolutely anything. And finally, the landlord is also not available to meet in person. So they may say they're going to send somebody, or hey, go down and check out the property. I can't be there to meet you, but check it out, and then I'll take payment or a down payment, and then we'll work it out. And then what happens is the person gets down there to check out the property. If there's nobody there, they think it's okay, so they pay up front and they lose that money. And in some cases, they get there, check out the property, and they find out somebody actually already owns it, or somebody already lives there, in which case it's a hassle, but at least they've saved their money. Again, I'm not going to read all of these, but again, rental real estate scams can be on both sides. One on the housing itself, that it doesn't exist as described, or from people who are trying to scam you out of refinancing money or out of money to find listings. So these are things, bullet points that I want you to look over, and especially as people who serve others as case managers or reentry officials, or I'm not sure what you call yourselves, but it's very important that we act as one extra line of security for people who may not know these tips. Imposter scams is a really big one. It encompasses a lot of things, including my next category. But basically, it's when somebody is representing themselves as somebody they're not. Most often, we see this with older individuals when they get calls pretending they're from the Social Security office or from the Medicaid, Medicare offices. Sometimes they act as if they're for law enforcement and they're collecting for the PBA, or if they say, you have open warrants against you, and if you don't pay, we're going to come arrest you. As somebody who comes from a family of law enforcement, I can tell you, if the police want to arrest you, they're going to come and arrest you. They're not going to give you a fair warning and say, hey, heads up, I'm going to come arrest you. Some signs of imposter scams, they ask for requests of gift cards or wire transfers. Gift cards is very, very important when it comes to cyber safety. Many scammers will ask for gift cards as initial payment. And this is because once they get that, they can spend down that money immediately. They have systems set up where that's spent immediately and you'll never get your money back. Gift cards are for yourself to buy things or for gifting to other people. It's never to pay for something or to give to somebody asks for payment and pay off taxes or pay off a speeding fine or something like that. These imposters may also insist that their request remain a secret. They do this often because they don't want you talking about it and having somebody tell you, oh no, that's a scam and don't pay that person. They also, when they say keep it a secret, they also want you to make the payment in a rush. They say, if you don't do this, you're going to get arrested. Or you don't do this, we're going to cut off your Social Security payments. Or if you don't do this, we're going to, or if you don't pay now, you're going to miss this offer. These are all tactics they use to make you kind of knee-jerk into a decision and then lose that money, unfortunately. And they threaten dire consequences, whether it's, like I said, whether it's incarceration, whether it's cutting off of benefits, whether it's something might happen to your grandkids. One type of imposter scam is called a grandparent scam, where they call up and they say, oh, your granddaughter or grandson's been hurt in an accident and we need some money so we can start, treating them or to bail them out of jail because they were arrested during the accident. These are things that prey on our need to help people we love in an emergency because we're good-hearted, and it gets our emotions tightened to the point where we're not thinking about our actions. Again, some good bullet points: never share your Social Security number unless it's absolutely necessary, and try not to do that online. There are very few agencies nowadays that need your whole Social Security number. Same thing, avoid giving out your credit card and bank account information over the phone unless you're the one that actually made the call. People can call and as imposters make it look like the call came from your bank, make the call look like it came from your credit card company. So it looks legitimate. In that case, tell them, and they're asking you for money, tell them you'll call them back and call the number on the back of your card or on the back of your statement. That way you know you're getting through to the correct agency. And always review your statements. If you see small charges on there for a couple of cents, that's usually a sign that somebody has your credit card information and they're testing to make sure it works. So you want to review your credit card statements really regularly and make sure nothing fishy is going on there. Romance scams is a type of imposter scam, but I put it on its own here because it's it is very serious, and it has a really strong impact, especially when we're talking about people who may be incarcerated, or we're talking about their loved ones that they've left behind. Romance scammers pretend to be somebody who's romantically involved in order to get something of value. And what that means, that could mean money in the form of gift cards, maybe, but it can also be information. They're pretending to be loved ones, so they get information about you or information about your business, things like that. Or even we see them sometimes for green cards. What happens is they declare their love very early on, and a lot of times this isn't as hard as it seems, because when we go onto a site like Match.com or Facebook or any other kind of dating sites or social media sites, we're doing so with the expectation of meeting people we don't know. So our guards are already dropped, right? And then if they go back and do what's called social engineering, they can go back and see that you love French bulldogs, and they can see that you love the Buckeyes, and then go through and see all these things, and then pretend that they have these things in common with you, which makes you even more connected. So when they declare their love, it doesn't seem as odd a thing. And then as they do that, they want to take you away from the site and do private texts, private messages, whether it's on WhatsApp or text or whatever. They do that to remove all the rest of the safeguards, your friends and family that can see your interactions, and Facebook or Match.com or whoever staff who are out there trying to find red flags. And once they make these relationships, they do ask for money, sometimes for gift cards, sometimes for straight money. And they say usually it's because they have to pay a bill. Maybe they have a sick family and would love to come visit you, but my daughter needs some surgery and I can't pay it and the airline because it's just too much money. They'll say they work on an oil rig or overseas, serving overseas, and it's very expensive for them to do so. And when they do finally say, hey, I'm going to make that trip and see you, we're going to finally be together, they postpone repeatedly these plans and they cancel them. And what happens is they slowly and surely take more and more money. We've had people I've worked with that have lost 401ks. They've lost property. They've lost, one person lost up to 6 figures. And what the person lost the 401k, not only did they lose that money, which is their retirement money, but then they had to pay taxes on the money that they lost. So it's a really brutal thing. And then there's the emotional impact of it. Romance scammers establish trust, like I said, but they isolate you from your friends and family, which can be emotionally taxing, but also breaks you away from any kind of support system that you had in place. And then they use that to monopolize your time, monopolize your money, and abuse you psychologically, even fear, because you assume that they know where you live, and there's danger there if you don't do what they say you want them to do. So this is very similar to how domestic abusers work, and oftentimes the consequences are the same. A person who's been victimized feels violated. They feel ashamed of having been put in that situation. They feel grief over loss of their friends and family relationships. And oftentimes this manifests in suicidal ideation or substance abuse issues, and which has its own, spirals that have to be dealt with. So the reason I broke out romance scams was because of how serious of a problem it really is. One more myth, online shopping sites are all secure. If you're shopping on something like Amazon, hey, this is really secure, everything's going to be okay. And that's not the case. Even on the sites that we know are legitimate, it may not be the most secure. Online shopping scams happen in a lot of ways. They can be counterfeit sites where the email address looks a little off. So in case, instead of being on Amazon, it may say, Amazon. That's a ridiculous example, but they do make sites that look very similar to the real thing. And when you get on them, it looks like a real shopping site, looks like a real banking site, whatever it is. And the website does not have what you can see here, a little lock next to the address, or the S next to HTTP. And the S means secure. It means everything that you're doing is encrypted. So I'm going to pick on Amazon again. Amazon has that HTTPS and the lock. So when you present your credit card information on there, it's encrypted and more secure. If you're buying from an online vendor that you met on Facebook or Instagram that you never heard of, but looks like it's legit, if they don't have that, then you're putting your credit card and information and personal information all at risk. And a lot of ads, we'll see these in emails that come in and texts that come in. They have misspelled or misused words. They do that by design. The people who notice that are going to delete it. The people who don't notice it are the ones they want to engage with, so they can kind of thin the herd of people who they're dealing with. And when it comes to counterfeit sites, it is financial, that the risk is mostly financial, but not always. If we think about something like counterfeit drugs, a lot of people now want to order their pharmacy prescriptions online, and they'll go to Canadian pharmacies to boot to make sure that they're getting a lower price. But oftentimes these are sites generating out of Russia or China, and they look legitimate, but you're going to end up is paying for something that doesn't come, or it comes with the wrong active ingredient or no active ingredient, and in which case then you're putting your life at risk because your medication is not working how it should. And so online shopping scams seem annoying. It seems like it's a risk to your credit card, but it also can be a risk to your health and to your credit in general. If online shopping, somebody swoops up your credit card information and wrecks your credit, that's going to make it all the harder to get housing, to get a loan, to get a job at times, which then puts you more vulnerable to the scams that we saw before. So they're all connected, and it's really important that we look at things like this. Here's another example of a site looking fishy. If you get an email with a great offer, and you hover, and it says go to ebay.com, and you hover your cursor over the eBay, and on the bottom of your screen you'll see where that actually directs. And in this example, it directs to a site that's not something anybody's heard of. That shows you that that site is phony, and they're trying to either install malware onto your computer or direct you somewhere that you shouldn't be. So you're going to get your money taken. One more myth. I must have done something wrong to have been put in this situation, to have my personal ID stolen, to have my credit card information stolen. And that's not the case. Definitely not the case. One good example is online harassment and online stalking. Very often it's the person who is doing the stalking that is making these decisions without the person who's being harassed knowing it, or once they're being harassed, not having done anything to deserve it. Another example I want to show you is some of these things from the semi-recent news. The Equifax breach, just about 143 million, that's about a third of Americans were swept up in the Equifax hack. Target data theft affected 70 million customers. And all you had to do to have been impacted by this was shop at Target at some point during the period that it was hacked. So you can see, even though you didn't do anything, you might not even know you've been a victim of credit card theft, identity theft, stolen emails, whatever it is. And depending on when these companies find out, and when these companies decide to tell the public, it may be a very long time that your information's out there before you know it can do anything about it. And then one more myth, there is nothing incarcerated individuals can do to protect themselves from cybercrime. This is definitely not the case, and I think that's really important to know. Like anybody else, they have certain protections that they are entitled to, and there are certain things that they can do to help themselves. Here are some things that anyone can do. Freezing the credit. You can also freeze or lock your credit, which means you just turn it off if you don't think you're going to make a major purchase, a car, a house, something else where they need to check your credit. Just turn it off, and then if somebody tries to open something on your account, it's caught. You can always monitor your credit on annualcreditreport.com. You're entitled to one free credit report per agency per year, but I think they've upped that number once the pandemic started. I'm not sure if that's still the case. Federal Trade Commission, you can report fraud, and what you'll get in an email along with the information from Daryl is some Consumer Financial Protection Bureau tip sheet specifically for people who've been incarcerated, some tips that they can do to keep themselves safe and to kind of lock up their identities. Also, they can reinforce their own cybersecurity. This is what I talk about a lot, and I think this is something that anybody should do, whether it's you, whether it's loved ones, whether it's people who you serve. It's really important. The first thing is protecting your mobile devices. That is locking your screen and keeping your phone with you where you need to, and then keeping it updated. When you see that red light shine that says update available, whether it's on your phone or on your laptop, always update it, because that means it's a security patch. More times than not, it's a security patch because somebody found a way around something. Avoid phishing attempts by not clicking on things that look odd or that you weren't expecting to get. Protect accounts with strong authentication. I'm going to talk about passwords in a minute. But strong authentication is when you put in your password and then you get a text with a code, or you have to add your fingerprint, or you have to add one more layer of identity to get into that account. It makes it exponentially safer, your accounts and devices. And then use trusted security tools. Make sure you have antivirus software, VPNs, things like that, if you need to use them. But I want to talk about passwords before I stop here today. If you're using these passwords, please change them. It looks silly if you're not, if you have good passwords, but people still do use these. And these can be broken immediately, less than a second, by any kind of algorithm. In fact, any dictionary word can be broken almost immediately, even if you replace the O with a 0 or the S with a $sign. The algorithms can break through those in brute force. Instead, I recommend passphrases. 8 to 26 characters sounds like a very long sentence, sounds like a very long thing to remember. But if you pick a sentence that you say a lot, maybe a song lyric, maybe a poem lyric, maybe an inside joke or a punchline to a joke, it could be something that is very easy to remember. I chose "It's been a hard day's night." That's a phrase that most people can remember, but because the words are all strung together, it's very, very hard to break. It would take thousands of years for an algorithm to break through that. And never repeat the same, don't use the same password for your Netflix that you use for your bank, because if your passwords are picked up in one place, they will try several other places to try to get into your accounts and devices. Here's a great, you're going to get a copy of this. Here's a great site to try your password, security.org/how-secure-is-my-password. You just enter your password. For this example, I entered password 1, which is one of those bad passwords that we talked about, and it shows that that would be cracked instantly. You don't want to use that because it's just not safe. It's like leaving, again, your car door or your home unlocked. Instead, I tried it with one of my passwords, which I'm not going to show you, but it is several characters long, and it shows it will take 34,000 years for anything to break that. And again, I just used a short phrase that I'm familiar with, that I know I'm not going to forget, but it works so much better than just a simple password. And so I recommend that you go on the site and try it out and try out different passwords and phrases that you might like. One last myth: financial loss is the only impact. It's not. I talked about the emotional impact from romance scams. There's also the impact of time to straighten out that broken credit, straighten out those taxes that were filed in your name, straighten out your identity theft. 1 out of 4 US adults have been impacted by cybercrime. And yes, it is financial. That 4.2 billion is a very low number. That represents just people who they were victims of crime, who chose to report it and chose to report it to the FBI. So if you think all about all the people who have lost money and chose not to report it, that 4.2 billion is more like 300 billion plus dollars. It's incredible. But here, like I said, are some of the more impacts of cybercrime. Anxiety you get from having been scammed, and maybe large sums of money were taken from your bank account. Then you're worried. You're like, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay the grocery bill? How am I going to pay the light bill? That leads to anxiety and shame. And like I said, it can lead to major depression and substance abuse issues. There's also loneliness that comes from the breaking of something like a romance scam, where you feel alone and you don't know what to do. And it goes on and on. The consequences can be multiplied and commingled. So I went through that, I hope not too fast, but I think I covered a lot of ground here for you. So I'm going to show you a couple of resources that you can hit. First is fightcybercrime.org. So if you have been impacted by cybercrime, I recommend going to the site. You can just choose your crime type. It'll walk you through what you need to do to report the crime, what you need to do to protect yourself from it happening again, and what you need to do to recognize signs of similar types of crimes. And then I also recommend scamspotter.org, which goes through signs of a scam, text scams, email scams, things like that. It's a great site to go through with older adults because it's big and colorful and easy to read fonts. But it also has a quiz on there, so it'll give you scenarios and say, yes, this is a scam. No, that looks good. And it has some pretty funny videos on there as well. So with those resources and some of the tips I showed you, I hope this has made you a little bit safer today. And I'm going to open the floor to some questions I hope you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. A lot of good information. I have not seen any questions in the chat so far, but if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we have plenty of time for Mark to respond. So anything, go ahead.
I apologize for being hoarse. That got
okay.
me today.
So again, if anyone has anything, go ahead and put it in the chat. But while we wait for a few questions from our participants, Mark, there's a couple of things I'd ask you to expound on just a bit. Can you give us sort of an example of the content of one of those rental scams? Like would it be by phone, by email, or how would that likely happen?
A lot of times it happens on sites like Craigslist, free sites, where they will post something like for sale by owner. There's nothing wrong with a for sale or for rent by owner, but you have to make sure that you that property is theirs first to give away, and that you have access to it without paying any money to see it, without paying any money to do anything. A lot of times now people will take photos of houses or apartments off of Zillow or similar sites, and they'll recreate the listing so it looks legitimate. So what you want to do is maybe do a reverse image search, which is go to images.google.com and upload that image, and it'll show you all the places that that it's listed to make sure that's a legitimate house, legitimate site. Hi, Vanita. The freezing accounts, yeah, definitely. That's a good thing to do. There's a credit freeze where you can contact Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, and tell them you want a freeze put on your account. And what it does is it just freezes it all together, and you have to contact them again to get it up and going. And then what somebody does is, what if somebody does try to open an account, they can't do anything. And more than likely you get a notification that something's been tried on your account. There's also now credit locks, which you can do via your phone. And it works like an app. You can just click it on, click it off if you think, you know, you're going to want to make a purchase in the near future, but you still want to keep your credit locked down. I would recommend looking into that. And when it comes to credit alerts, a lot of your credit card companies nowadays will offer that for free. So also look into that if you can. Ask them if they have any kind of ID or credit monitoring for you.
So Mark, that leads to a question I was going to ask you to talk a little bit more about along those same lines. If you may recall from the session you were with us last week with a different group, that we're looking at the possibility of how we might be able to help folks freeze their credit when they come into our systems. But in the meantime, if someone is working with or trying to assist an incarcerated person or an incarcerated loved one, is it possible for someone else to freeze their credit, to activate that credit freeze?
It is, because now online they don't know who's actually doing the freezing, but that requires a great deal of trust. A lot of times what we see with identity theft, unfortunately, is friends or loved ones are the ones who are perpetrating this. We see that a lot with caregivers and stuff. So we want to make sure that that the person who is doing this on their behalf is somebody trustworthy. But yeah, to answer your question, Kim, to do it before going in, it is a good option to consider. Definitely, because it's less likely they have more opportunity. Like I check my credit card statement all the time. I check my credit report all the time, but they might not have those opportunities that I do. So this way they can at least have that kind of peace of mind to know that part of their life is going to be frozen and good.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions here just yet. Can you talk a little bit more? This was certainly a learning point for me, or sort of something more to think about. You mentioned the victimization tactics and how in many ways that mirrors the victimization tactics of someone who's an abuser or physically abusing folks. And I would imagine most of the folks on this call are probably familiar with that, but can you talk a little bit more about how those two things sort of mirror physical abuse?
Yeah, definitely. Oftentimes they're looking for people who are similar. For the romance scammers and the physical abusers, they're looking for people who are maybe emotionally vulnerable. Maybe they've gone through some bad breakups. They've had bad childhoods where they have different relationships with authority type figures or men and women in their lives. And they use that to their advantage to take control of the situation, take control of their lives, isolate them from their loved ones. That's a big one for both types of criminals, both types of perpetrators, where once they take you away from that orbit of your friends and family, they're able to put more control on your life. And then eventually, I see this a lot with romance scammers, and I'm sure some of you have seen it with people who have been survivors of domestic violence. They want to push away their friends and family in favor of that person, because they're so now ingrained in there emotionally and psychologically that it fractures families because of this. And a lot of times it takes control of who you see, what you do, and the romance scammers will do that as well. Like they want to make sure that you're contacting them all the time and you're not talking to other people, because they're afraid that somebody's going to try to talk you out of it. But also, it puts that fear in you, and that fear makes the person more likely to acquiesce to things that are asked of them, unfortunately.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Just one last thing that I ask you to talk a little bit more about, if you would. Just this is more of a concrete kind of thing. You mentioned about updating devices, updating.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that and what to look for with those sort of auto-prompted updates?
Yeah. I have an iPhone, but I'm sure the Android phones are the same. You'll get a red beacon that says update available. And if you're like I used to be, or like everybody I know, you hit remind me later and then forget about it. But a lot of times these are because a bad guy somewhere found a way into your computer or into your phone that the Apple or Google didn't know about or needs to patch. And when you do the update, they're patching that in there. And the same thing for apps. Apps are very vulnerable because a lot of times they don't have developers don't have the infrastructure that a Google or an Apple has. So they need to do constant updates for security. So always, if you can, set automatic updates so it reminds you to do it and does it automatically, or just check for it periodically, because it really, once you get something on your computer or on your phone, then you don't know what they're looking at and they don't know what you're doing behind you. They could put what's called a keystroker on there. And if you're working with sensitive materials, you're working with clients, you want to make sure that their stuff is locked down, HIPAA compliant, private, whatever it is, whatever you're working on, making sure that your client stuff is confidential.
Okay, very good. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
A lot of good information. I'm not seeing any other questions. If anyone has anything, please put it in the chat. I'll remind everyone that you will get a copy of Mark's presentation, and he mentioned some other tools and tips that will be available. So I'll have those, and we'll get those out to you in the next couple of days via email from the Office of Reentry. So look for that email. In the meantime, if you have any other questions or anything, you can certainly contact me, and we'll follow up that route. But Mark, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you being here, and really good presentation. A lot of good information, I think, for all of us, and certainly for folks who are serving the reentry population as well. So we appreciate that.
Daryl, you have another question in the chat.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
that's a good one. That's a good one, Michelle, because senior issues are near and dear to my heart. So we want to keep them safe, especially if we're caregivers, because a lot of times we don't know if the person in our life did something on their own volition, or were tricked into it, or they may not have their full mental facilities there. So we want to make sure that they're safe. I would say make sure that they know they don't have to answer the phone every time. Once you do, and those robocalls keep coming in, they're going to keep coming in because they know that line is an active line, and they're going to just keep up. Make sure that they have a voicemail set up. That way, if it is an important call and if somebody really does need them, they will leave a message to call back, because the elderly population is most impacted by the phone scammers, the IRS ones, the Social Security ones. Make sure that they know government agencies are never going to call them or email them with information. They're going to send a letter or send a notification that you're going to get an email, and never ever send money over wire or gift cards for government agencies. The other thing I was going to say is there's two sides of that. I was talking about older people in caregiving situations, but really there's a lot of great parts of being older too, which means we could have vacation properties, we have higher 401ks, we could have all kinds of things, nest eggs put aside, and so scammers are looking for that too. So they're looking ways around that, and so some of the tips I said for identity making sure your credit cards are checked all the time goes just as much for seniors, making sure that they're not, I mean, the one sharing your social security number, that is more older adults are probably likely to do that because that's how things used to be. We used to put our social security number on everything. It used to be asked for everything, even video store rentals would ask you stuff like that. And it seemed like it was no big deal. So letting them know that they don't need to do that. Like their doctor has their health insurance and their Medicare information. They don't need the social security number to get a procedure done, things like that. So yeah, the tips I laid down are for everybody, but we want to just make sure that friends and neighbors are looking out for our older adults too.
All right, I think I'm not seeing anything else here. So in the meantime, we want you to complete one more poll for us. So Joe, if you can launch that poll now, we'll leave it up for about a minute or so. And we ask you to go ahead and respond to that, please. I see a raised hand. Linnea, did you have something?
Maybe she was just stretching virtually.
No, I didn't. I hit the wrong button. Sorry, Daryl.
Okay.
Michelle actually has another question, Daryl.
Oh,
Okay.
oh yes. I didn't mean to imply that families are always the ones to scam, but that does happen from time to time. And we want to make sure that, you know, that's put out there because not everything's roses all the time. Are there signs to watch out for? That's a tough one because family stuff tends to be private, so we don't always spot the signs. But
Right.
if there are moves to kind of take more control of a person's finances and control of their computer stuff, it is harder to tell because sometimes that's very normal. You know, I've had to take control of my father-in-law's finances because of just, you know, health issues. And so it would seem odd from an outsider, but not from the family dynamic we have here. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that other than maybe, and I've talked to banking groups about this. If you see a loved one going to the bank a lot to make withdrawals in odd amounts or when they never used to, it may be a sign that they're cashing checks for wrong reasons to give money out, whether it's to that loved one or to a scammer. Banks are now trained to look out for that, but doesn't mean that's always going to get through. But yeah, I'd hate to go into assuming things about family dynamics. I apologize. I may not be as well versed on that as I would want to be. Sorry,
Well,
Michelle.
that's good question. So we appreciate that.
It's a great question. I'm going to study up on it.
Yeah. Okay, we appreciate everybody responding. Okay, now I'm seeing one more thing in the chat here. Okay. Kim says the instance of hacking emails has gotten more common.
No, if passwords are not enough, if you have an option to do multi-factor, which is also called 2FA or MFA, do so. That's what I talked about when you have your password put in and then you get a code to put in after that to your phone. Because what would happen is if somebody has your password, they can do that remotely. I can try to log into your email from here, but I wouldn't have your phone and the code goes to your phone. So that makes it
Right.
multiple times more safe to have that. So I would have a change of password and the 2FA when possible.
All right. Very good. All right, I'm not saying anything. Okay.
I'll write it down in the
Okay,
chat here.
you'll put it in the chat, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I know a lot of companies, public and private, are moving towards, that multi-factor authentication.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you don't have it on everything, your bank accounts and your emails are great to have it on, because that's where you're doing a lot of your finance and private stuff. And I would have it on, if you have a health app, I would do that, because, you know, 23andMe, that's your genes. That's weird. I don't want people accessing that.
All right, not saying anything else. I'll make sure we put that note in the communication that goes out in the next day or two following the session. So Mark, again, we appreciate your time and the information, answering a lot of questions on something that's really important to all of us as we sort of navigate daily. So we appreciate that, and I appreciate all of you for being here. Hopefully you will join us again in May, on the second Tuesday evening in May, when our topic will be medication-assisted treatment and some of the things that are going on around that. So we got some exciting information on that as well. So we look forward to seeing you then. Look for the invite and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Roxanne. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.